Okay. I think you're ready. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Thank you for coming out on this blustery afternoon. Always happy to get people in the museum. And Lunch and Learn is one of the ways we do that. And kind of excited today, but we have a little bit of housekeeping. The Lunch and Learn series is made possible by support from our presenting sponsor, MCK, CPAs, and advisors. Today's program is being live streamed, and we want to give a special thank you to our live stream sponsor, WGOT, Bloomington-Normal Public Media, and they're also part of the NPR network. Today we have with us Mr. Andrew Thomas, Dr. Andrew, and he's going to share some insight on conducting oral histories in the African American community. A little bit about Andrew. Andrew is the chairperson for the Bloomington-Normal Black History Project and has been active in the project since 2022. Thomas conducts oral histories of African Americans in Bloomington-Normal, and his research has earned him an Oscar Waddell Fellowship Award, here courtesy of the project and McLean County Historical Society. Thomas received his master's in history at Illinois State University in the spring of 2023. He is a second-year PhD student at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where he studied African American history, race, and ethnicity. Mr. Thomas has a manuscript under review for the Illinois State Historical Society titled "We All Played Together: A Historical Account of Bloomington-Normal's African American Musicians from 1940 to 2000. He is also a professional blues drummer and a songwriter and has over 25, I didn't know this, 25 albums to his credit. So at this time, would you please help me give a warm welcome to our guest, Dr. Andrew Thomas.
Thank you all. Thank you for that wonderful round of applause. I want to start off by saying I am not a doctor, okay? Just yet. I'm working towards my doctorate in history, so I just want to make that claim, okay? I'm not a doctor yet, but I'm working on it. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I'm excited to be here today, but before I begin, before I get too far into this, I want to thank Candace Summers and Tori Moray and Jeff Woodard at the museum. Thank you so much for inviting me. Also, I want to talk briefly about the Bloomington-Normal Black History Project. This project started in 1982 by Dr. Mildred Pratt and also an activist named Carabelle Washington. Dr. Pratt, she's a sociologist at Illinois State University, and she gave assignments to her students to go out into the town and interview elderly African American members of the town at the churches and this and that and different clubs. And with these interviews, she took the transcripts and she logged the transcripts here in the museum by 1989. The project became affiliated with the museum, and since 1982 to the present, we have amassed over 100 oral histories that are stored here in the museum. So I encourage anybody, if you want to learn more about local Black history, you can always talk to the museum library archivist, Bill Kemp. He's here today, and he can always direct you to the archives and let you explore more about local Black history. But I want to get into the methods that I use as chairperson for the Bloomington-Normal Black History Project. I've been able to add to the archives. I've done at least 11 oral histories so far, being the chairperson of the project. And I've developed my own framework for conducting oral histories. So this project, Oral Histories, catering Africana studies, Black journalism, and canonical approaches to oral histories. So, when we are centering Africana studies, I'm presenting this in the vein of the Black History Month celebrations that we are having. Also, this presentation will highlight some of my instructors that I've had during my educational journey. So I'm able to show reference to the people that I've learned these different methodologies from and who have also shaped my way of conducting oral histories. Also, I want to say that even though this project is geared toward conducting oral histories for African Americans, you can also use these methodologies for different ethnicities and cultures. Every culture has specialties and special things that can be used to shape questions for oral histories. So the thing is, I'm using these different methodologies to shape how I conduct oral histories and my questions and analysis to conduct oral histories. So what is Africana studies? Africana studies is a combination of studying African culture, mostly West African culture and mores, with an amalgamation of studying African culture with African diaspora studies and also African American studies. I always say that when you want to study the history of Black folks, the history should not begin with the United States. You never start the study of history of Black people with slavery and oppression. You always start with West Africa. What were Black people doing before enslavement? These cultural traits has remained with us, and they are remnants in our culture, and I believe that they shape who we are today as African Americans. Some books that I've read that concretizes this statement, you can read Flash of the Spirit, written by Robert Ferris Thomas, where he talks about various African ethnicities, the Igbo, and the Fon, and the Yoruba peoples, and some of their same food ways and religious cosmology beliefs, and all these things that we wrap up in what we call Africanisms that remain with us today. There are cultural traits. You can study more about Africanisms with Blues People, written by Amiri Baraka. He discusses and defines what Africanisms are. Also, we have books, Mojo Working, another great book that discusses African cosmology and religious practices that are still with us today, that's wrapped within the enshroudment of Christianity. Also, I would like to point out that Africanisms are found in food ways, healthcare practices, and child rearing. So when we are developing these questions, if we understand West African culture and African American culture, we can make questions that later we can analyze and draw out these cultural remnants that remain with Black folks today. I want to send a shout out to my professor, a great man. His name is Professor Leon Dash. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. And I took his class, Black Journalism, because I wanted to gain an extra special understanding of how to conduct oral histories. I want to expand my knowledge of just talking to people. How do I develop good conversations? And one thing that he always says is, you must do research on your interview participant before you conduct the interview. You want to learn as much as you can about the person. Maybe you want to look at their website if they have one, if they have any oral histories already conducted with them that's lodged here in the museum from their ancestors, you want to read those. If they have ever did any interviews in the past, you want to read those. Also, you want to do your homework on the layout of the land. You want to know the names of the social institutions that your interview participant may have attended. These may be churches and social organizations. Also, it is good practice to talk to people that may know your interview participant before you meet them so they can vouch for you. You want to have somebody break the ice and say, hey, this person is worthy of your time. You can trust this person with your story. And if you're able to get those things done before you conduct the interview, it will make for a much better interview. One of the things that was really tough that I learned from Leon Dash, he says when you conduct an oral history, you don't write anything down, and you never show up with questions written down. Because, he said, well, it makes it odd. If I'm talking to a person and I'm steady looking at questions and I'm asking them these questions written down already, it takes away from the organic experience of a good conversation. Also, if you write down their responses, it makes the person feel like they're being examined instead of being talked to. So you want to be able to conduct an interview in a chronological order, starting with a person's grandparents or the eldest person in their family. Then you get down to their parents, ask them questions about them, what did they do for a living, and all these kind of things. Then you ask about the participants' maybe brothers and sisters that are older. Then you get to them and their lives. And then you ask about their younger siblings, and then the children and family extended members. But if you can remember all the questions that you want to ask and the special things about them, it's not so easy. So you have to do your homework before you start the interview. And you have to have a clear vision of who this person is and what things to ask them before you start. Also, other pointers are you don't ask leading questions, okay? You want to use a conversational approach, make the person feel comfortable when you're talking to them. Also, I learned that, that when you are conducting interviews in the journalistic approach, you never overtalk your participant. Ask questions and let them tell you their story. So you must have some patience when you do this work. So the canonical approach to oral histories I learned from my mentor here at the museum, Jeff Woodard. Jeff Woodard, he's the marketing director. He's the member who really coached me into doing interviews here at the Bloomington-Normal Black History Project. I learned a wealth of knowledge from him. And he stresses that we must, before we begin an interview, we have to procure a consent form from the participant. We have to make sure that we let them know that the interview may be video recorded or audio recorded. We need to let the participant know that they can opt out of the interview at any time. We also want to identify the interviewer first by asking the interviewer to say and spell their name. Sometimes we get so rushed to start the interview, we forget to ask the participant, hey, what is your name? Could you please spell your name? And you want to have them clearly say and spell their name before you start the questions. You want to work in a chronological order. Jeff Woodard, he told me, be sure to have some water because you might get thirsty while you're talking, because interviews, they sometimes can last from 60 minutes to a 3-hour span. Also have tissues, Kleenex, ready when you are interviewing, because a lot of times you might talk to the participant, and they might talk about a death that they had in the family or a tragic event that may trigger an emotional outburst. Also, when you are interviewing African American participants, we must be cognizant that the subject of race may come up during the interview. A lot of times, we often think that racial discrimination and segregation was only in the South in the past. But I'm here to tell you from my experience from interviewing African Americans here in the county that were here during the 1930s and 40s and 50s, that they had to really undergo racial tensions, racial discrimination, segregation right here in Bloomington, Illinois. And it was ubiquitous throughout central Illinois. We have the book Sundown Towns that explains this further if you want to read more about this. And also, when we ask questions concerning the past, we must be ready to console and ask questions that does not put a person in a difficult spot, but also we want to learn much as we can about the past. A good book to consult about interviewing and editing oral histories, this one here I have, Interviewing as Qualitative Research. This book offers tips. This author, Irving Seidman, he advised to tolerate silence during an interview. Don't be afraid of a long pause. You know, sometimes when we have a conversation, a long pause can make us a little uncomfortable. We feel like we need to fill up the spaces all the time when we have a conversation, but sometimes it's appropriate to let the interview participant just think and relax and come up with their answers. Avoid leading questions, as I said before. Listen more, talk less. And he talks about transcribing. And he talks about some other things that go with canonical research when he says here, he says, ask grand tour questions. A grand tour question is a question that says, so can you tell me about your day at this time? It gives you a grand tour insight of a person's life, an open-ended question. I also would like to talk about my mentor and one of my professors at Illinois State University. Her name is Dr. Kyle Siani. Dr. Siani, she is a historian. She specializes in women's history and gender. And during her oral history class, the first big major assignment that I had that she gave us was we had to conduct oral histories with the oldest person in our family. And that was my first oral history that I ever conducted. And I learned so much about myself and about my ancestors from that particular assignment. And I encourage, as she does, that if anyone wants to start doing oral history, start with your family. You don't need a PhD or a master's degree or a bachelor's to conduct an oral history. But you have to do some research on the participant. You have to learn as much as you can about the person, the layout of the land, so to speak, the geographical landscape of where they lived. And you want to develop good questions. Use what you know about your ethnicity to develop good questions. So, for example, if you are interviewing someone in your family and you want to talk about recipes, or if you're interviewing someone that's not in your family and you want to talk about foodways and recipes, offer up something that you know about your cultural recipes so you can get them to talk about theirs. And you can do the same thing with child rearing. You can do the same thing with healing practices, because like I say, every culture has something special about their ethnicity that you can use while you conduct your oral histories. So for a recap, I just want to say that Africana Studies provides themes for developing questions centered on religious practices, foodways, healthcare, childcare, and linguistics, language patterns. And these questions can be analyzed later when we look at the long view of the African American experience in the United States. We can use, also a part of the framework, we have the Black journalistic approach, which I extracted from my coursework at University of Illinois with Professor Leon Dash. And he advises us to gain the trust of the participant, researching the interview participant as much as you can, researching the geographical landscape and social relationships that developed in the participant's town. Develop conversation with the participant. Do not write anything down or read questions as you conduct your interview. Also, we have the canonical instructions that I've learned here at the museum, and these instructions apply when you are conducting oral histories that you want to have logged in an institution. Right? So if you're just doing oral history that you want to do for your own personal sake, you don't really need to follow the canonical instructions as far as getting a consent form and all of this. But if you want to do oral histories and you want to have them logged in an institution, whether it's a school or museum, you must gain consent before conducting the interview, record the interview the participant in a chronological historical order, be prepared to provide emotional support when discussing race, personal relationships, or deceased loved ones. And also we learned that anybody can start doing oral histories just by starting with your own family. I want to say that this has been a real pleasure. I thank you so much for coming out. and I'd like to take any questions from anybody that has them.
Thank you, Andrew. Do you have any questions? Any questions? I think we got someone here that's going to point him out because I don't. He doesn't like to be pointed out, but we have here with us today Jack Muirhead, who is a long-time participant and one of the founders, maybe, of the Bloomington-Normal Black History Project. No, see, I always like to bestow these things on people. Like I call him Doctor, because he's going to be a doctor. I already know. What's your question, Jack?
I'm not very good at this, but you've done, did you say about 11 interviews? Could you talk a little bit about the scope of those? What time period, what people, what interesting things that you learned, or unexpected things maybe that you learned?
Yes. Well, I've learned about some of this town's extremely accomplished people who are maybe silenced in history or overlooked throughout history, and they are right here from this town. So I interviewed 10 oral histories specifically for my manuscript that's under review right now with the Illinois Historical Society about centering on Black musicians from this county from 1940 to 2000. And one of my participants was, I talked to so many, let me think of one that I really want to discuss. One just, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank right now. I talked to Jack Waddell. Jack Waddell, he was an opera singer. He attended Illinois Wesleyan University. Jack Waddell spoke several different languages. He starred in he spoke German fluently. He starred in Porgy and Bess. He was also a star in the play Hair. So he was a singer, actor. He spent many, many years traveling throughout Europe, and then he came back to the United States. He taught in New York. He had his own dance and acting studio right in downtown Manhattan in Times Square. So Jack Waddell, he's just so significant in the world of music here. And it was a great pleasure and honor to be able to talk with him. And he recently passed away from, I believe he had cancer. So it was a great honor to be able to be one of the last people to interview him and get his story logged here in the museum archives. So, yeah. So it was good to be able to learn more about some of our local heroes here in town.
Jack Waddell, did you happen to be able to talk to him about his grandfather, Willis Smith? Because that's a story that maybe we missed. That would have been a good story. Do you remember if he talked about his grandfather?
Yeah, he did. His grandfather owned a gas station in town, yeah. So that's one of the things that I remember. It's the fact that I didn't realize that a lot of the participants had elders and ancestors, grandparents that owned things here in town. So I learned that his grandfather had a gas station and that it was considered a safe space for African Americans, because a lot of places here in town do not allow African Americans, to be able to participate or attend so many public facilities. So his space was significant.
Okay. I have a question for you. We did a reboot of the Black History Project in 2017, and since then we've been able to conduct a little over 20 additional interviews, and between Andrew and myself and a few others, we've did quite a bit of extensive interviewing with some folks, elderly especially. And my question is for you, in doing this in the last year or so, can you recall a interview maybe you thought would have been difficult for you or emotional or anything of that nature?
Yes. Yeah. When I started the interviewing process for the Booker T. Washington home, that was really an emotional experience for me. I understand that the Booker T. Washington home was it was an orphanage here in town that that primarily served African American children. Many of them were quite young and just completely abandoned, you know, from their parents and the family, and they found themselves here being raised in the home. And the owners were an Italian couple named the Calameses, who were very strict. They took care of the children, but when I talked to, you know, the people who lived in the home, it was some of the stories was triggering their past and a lot of the things that they, you know, went through, you know, just being an orphan and living there. And particularly Mr. Bruce Thornton, he was the last person to live in the home. So talking to him, you know, he was talking about some of the memories of the past, and it was very emotional for me as well as for him. So that was one of the ones that stick out for sure now.
I'm just wondering, once you get your doctorate, what's your plan for your future and how this might play into it?
I'm watching the news daily to find out what will happen with my future. As we know, okay, well, my field of study is African American history, race and ethnicity, and unfortunately, those words are triggering a lot of people on the right who don't want to see African American history being taught in our schools anymore, in our universities. They're being banned. My study that I love, which is American history, told from a Black perspective, is being banned in a lot of Republican-led states. We know about Florida and their banning of African American history. So my future is maybe bleak. Who knows what happens after the next 4 years and a new administration comes in. It takes about 7 years of study to gain a PhD in most programs. It takes a very long program. I'm only 2 years in. So maybe by the time I graduate, it'll be a new president and a new administration, and maybe things will be looking up. My plans is to become a professor, a tenure professor. Also, because I study music history, I was a blues musician for many years. I wanted to continue my study with music and ethnicity, and I like to use music as a methodology to explain African American history and culture, and to be able to draw connections from West Africa to African American history and today's culture. So that's my my passion. That's my focus. And to write more, you know, I want to publish more articles and hopefully some books along the way. Yeah.
Have you had a chance to travel to Africa at all?
Have I had a chance to travel to Africa? Yes, but not as a scholar or a researcher. During my tenure as a blues musician, I've been to Africa twice. I've been to Casablanca, Morocco, played some gigs there throughout Morocco, and I've also been to Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, playing some music there, and doing some touring throughout Africa. But hopefully I get to go back to the continent again for research purposes.
Okay. I have a question. As Bill Kemp, our librarian, sometimes does a presentation and reminds us that there's been some gains in the African American community here. If you look at between Reconstruction and Jim Crow, you know, we had our number of black police officers in 1800s and that. And look at the city directories, there's a lot of folks who were in the industry, and then we kind of rolled that back. And so I preface that to say, my question to you is, we're currently looking at the 1950s where we had some gaps in the stories here. So we've been focusing on that. But I think it's a recurring theme where people have just really struggled. And me personally, I find it exhausting, you know, and my question to you is, how do you stay upbeat when you hear some of these stories?
Good question. I don't stay upbeat.
Okay.
I'm human. I get down in the dumps when I hear about racial discrimination and segregation here in town and throughout Central Illinois, and sometimes my emotions get the best of me. I try to do what was advised to me from my advisor, Dr. Sundiata Chajua of University of Illinois at Brandon-Champaign. He advises that to use my emotions for fodder to ignite my curiosity and continue study. So I try to use my frustrations that I have with the study and with learning of history, try to channel that anger that I feel, being conscious of racial relations, and I try to transform that into passion for the study, to read more books and to learn more. The only thing that quells, well, I should say nothing quells confusion and anger and bitterness more than education. The more we read, the more we are able to enlighten ourselves and change our moving patterns, because it takes away confusion. A lot of times we become angry with what we see in society because we don't understand what we see. But the more I study race, the more I understand it, and the more I can just remain calm and process what I'm learning. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. Thank you. It helps me out. I know as we were doing some of these interviews, we had a situation where someone got really triggered, and after that we started to make sure we had, you know, Kleenex, you know, in the room for people. And I just, you know, early on, nobody ever told me that, you know, that you got to have some water, but no one would say, you probably need to have a box of Kleenex too. And so we do. When we do these interviews, we're prepared to do that. So what a celebration. Thank you, sir. Let's give a nice warm applause for Mr. Again, we want to thank you all for coming, and I'm going to ask that you join us next month. It'll be a lot warmer, I promise. And the Lunch and Learn will be artists, advocates, acrobats, and more, women who made McLean County history, and that will be on March 13th, same time, same channel. Tap in, and we'll see you there. Thank you.